Hello, and welcome to this episode of Counsel Trends. I'm Dr. Mercy Connors, and of course, I have the lovely Dr. Shanae Anderson with me today. And we are diving into a very controversial topic today, AI therapy chatbots. Now, you may have seen some of this stuff going viral on social media, and the news outlets picked this up, that there was an actual study that came out of the New England Journal of Medicine AI. We tried to find that article and we could not find it.
We can't access it. It's a new journal.
Very new journal. So we were not able to access it, but we did want to bring that to your attention. But we did find another article that we are going to discuss as well that is very similar to the one that was done by the New England Journal of Medicine AI. So what was really found out was that, and I find this title very interesting. Mm-hmm. It is First Therapy Chatbot Trial Shows AI Can Provide Gold Standard Care.
Right.
And okay, just as therapists, how does that make you feel to hear that a computer can provide gold standard care for something that we have done for I've done it for 10 years. You've done it for 30 years.
Plus years, yes. Yeah. They don't really define what that means. I think they're saying it's gold standard because in theory, people had a reduction in symptoms.
Right.
But is that truly gold standard care?
Well, I think this really does go to the whole concept of what is the goal of therapy. And I think most people think in the medical model that reduction of symptoms or cessation of symptoms is that goal.
Right.
But what did the person actually learn and how much are they actually able to apply that to their life, not just in maybe, for example, depression or anxiety symptoms, but then utilize it in different aspects of life, right?
Well, and again, I work with very complicated patients that are dealing with long-standing personality issues and disorders. Mm-hmm. And so this is something that I truly believe only a relationship can heal because their symptoms manifest in relationships.
Right.
And if you're going to have a bot interact with you, I don't know what that's going to say and do about personality dynamics.
Right. And so pretty much what we want to talk to you guys about is that this study looked only at anxiety, depression, and then shockingly enough, eating disorders.
I was blown away that they included that because I spent many years, 20, 30 years working with eating disorders, and it is one of the most difficult, complex disorders to work with. You need a full treatment team.
Right.
You have to have a physician. You need to have a psychiatrist. You need to have a dietitian or a nutritionist. You need to be able to see these individuals to see, are you underweight? What's going on? Are you having medical complications because of some of the issues? And to use a chat box to work with eating disorders was mind-blowing.
Yeah, I really had a really hard time with that, which it did show that it was not as accurate or wasn't
as effective.
There's the right word for it. Now, it was interesting. Now, I want you to know that there were only 106 people in the study. Mm-hmm. So very small number. This is not a broad study.
But I think everyone is losing their mind about it because they're calling it essentially the first clinical trial.
Yes.
And when they talk about clinical trial in particular with medicine, it's when you compare two groups.
Yes.
One group, let's say, gets a drug and the other is the control group and gets a placebo.
Right.
Or something like that. And so they did something similar here with the First Therapy chat box.
Yes. Chatbot.
See, I can't even get the name correct.
And now the people that were working with the chatbot did have a 51% reduction in symptoms of depression, a 31% reduction of symptoms in anxiety, and then the 19% reduction in symptoms with the eating disorders. So it just is very interesting. It also really, there were some limitations to this, and I appreciated that they actually brought this out, that there was a lot of clinical oversight for the bot. The one that I found very, very interesting is that it said that the bot would actually consult with a psychologist and a psychiatrist.
Right?
And I'm
like, how does that work?
I don't know. Like, I'm like, does it ask questions?
I know.
I don't know. I
Strange?
don't know if that was like the psychologist or the psychiatrist was like looking at the answers and then changing the way that the bot would actually say it, because that's how I've kind of understood, like when you're creating AI and you're putting guardrails on AI, that you can actually give it rules.
Right.
And so I'm wondering if that was like what they were doing. I just thought that was really, really interesting.
But my hunch is, again, if you're dealing with a therapy chat bot,
Yes.
and you're dealing with AI, I mean, maybe I'm wrong and I just don't understand a lot of this new stuff, but I would say things have to be pretty concrete.
Yes.
And that's where, again, like, are you having a depressed mood today? Yes or no?
Yep.
Or I don't know. I guess I'm wondering, how gray can they really get in terms of looking at the questions they ask, and in particular the answers and how they're measuring it? Because to me, and again, we couldn't look at the whole study because we couldn't actually access the actual study to see how they are actually assessing it. But that was the question I was having, is that, okay, so there's a 19% average reduction in concerns about body image and weight with regards to eating disorders. Are they just asking very concrete questions? Are you feeling better about your body and weight today, yes or no? Are they asking things on a Likert scale of like 1 to 7? To me, yes, you can assess some of those things through research, but is it really getting to the actual transformation that we seek in psychotherapy?
Well, and I'm also thinking, are they I know it's missing the nuances of body language, of tone.
Eye contact.
Yes.
There's no eye contact. And I think so much, I mean, again, you know how I work and I'm so attachment driven and what's going on in the brain. And I think that is what is so important about psychotherapy is what goes on here.
Yes.
And in particular, it's just like a parent and an infant, that eye-to-eye contact is so critical. And what that does to the orbital frontal cortex and the prefrontal cortex, where so many individuals are struggling. And so I could go off, I think, on some of the limitations here, but I think that perhaps there may be a place for these chatbots. Bots.
Yes. And it was,
still can't say it.
It was interesting because the researchers did say that there was no replacement for in-person care, which I was like, okay, thank you. Because I mean, I went to school for this for a long time. I've been in this field. But I also think that it was very, very interesting, and I loved that they brought this up, that the point in time that people tended to connect with the chatbot was late at night.
Right.
And I'm like, okay, so I think maybe what they're hitting on here is access, is when I am in the moment of struggling with my depression or anxiety or body image issues, that I am able to tap into something that can help me get through that moment. And I was like, okay, that I feel like is something significant. That is something that we should think about, because me and you talked about the importance of the consistency after session. Like we get to be with that person maybe an hour a week, sometimes depending on the situation, an hour every 2 weeks. That's a lot of time that person has to remember what we told them, remember the techniques we've given them, and then implement them in a time of distress. Like that's a lot. So I can see where this would be very, very helpful in that regard, where, okay, it's reminding you of the things that we've talked about. You know, it's also interesting. I wonder if they had the chat bot, and this may be something else to think about, listening in on the sessions. Like, so it would learn what you're doing. I know, right? It's creepy.
Freaks me out.
But that could be an option, right? Listening in on the sessions. And then it could be something that, you know, it would be prepped for those types of things. It would know your responses. You know, I don't know.
Well, but one of the things that it talks about is, wasn't it predominantly a CBT-driven model?
It was. So this one that we were looking at is definitely. So this is also the other study that we talked about. And this is from the Journal of Medical Internet Research. this is generative AI-enabled therapy support tool for improved clinical outcomes and patient engagement in group therapy, real-world observational study. And this came out, I believe, in 2025.
Yes.
And this one was specifically looking at CBT groups, which I kind of feel like these are two different things.
But yet similar because
Similar.
they're both using an AI option.
Yes. So this one, the one that was dealing with the groups, was actually working with, as we give people homework or psychoeducational materials or things to try at home, the bot was like helping them do that, helping them complete that homework or helping them utilize it in a real world scenario. So that was very, very interesting because I was like, oh, this is like a combination. This is like
an adjunct therapy kind of.
Yes, like takes the best of this one and uses it here. Like when I am in that situation, like when I'm late at night and my depression or my anxiety is going cray-cray, like I can now move over to this bot and say, okay, I know that Dr. Shanae told me that there's this skill that I should be using.
Or she taught me something. I just can't remember what it was.
Yes.
That's usually what happens.
Yes. So then that could be something that could be very useful. And what this article said is that they did see not only a reduction in symptoms, not only some cessation of the clinical, reaching the clinical threshold of depression and anxiety, but that the adherence to outpatient therapy sessions increased and that dropout rate decreased.
I thought that was amazing. And I think you're right. I think there is something that's going on that I think might be a great place for AI is in between sessions.
Yes.
It sounds like it is an option. Like, for example, I use a lot of DBT with my borderlines and even with people I treat with eating disorders and with addictions. And one of the things about DBT is that it's very skill driven.
Yes.
And it's very much used, let's say, distress tolerance skills when you're in a crisis.
Right.
And I actually already have patients that are using apps on their phone to remind them of some of these skills.
Yes.
And so that's where I'm wondering if there might be a place in between sessions, like they're saying, let me remind you that you have an appointment. Let me help remind you of some of the skills that you've learned in session and implement them so that you're not calling your therapist at 2:00 in the morning because you're in a crisis.
Right. And I think that's very, very helpful. But I do think that there is some major limitations here.
I agree.
One of the things that I kind of felt was a little creepy is that in this one where we're talking about the gold standard, they actually said that people were creating a therapeutic alliance with the chatbot. And they mentioned it a little bit in the other CBT one. And I just am like, I don't know if that's positive.
Well, I know. And in the original article, it says we did not expect, I don't think any of us would expect, that people would almost treat the software like a friend. It says to me that they were actually forming relationships with Therabot.
Yes. And that to me is concerning.
Yes.
I am all for the CBT one where they're helping them and things like that. But if you're forming a relationship with a computer and you feel like the computer maybe interacts with you better than people do. Now, I understand it's very non-judgmental and stuff like that. In the Therabot, they would actually... the people would initiate the conversation and it would be very conversational.
Right.
Like, I'm almost like a little bit concerned about that.
Well, I'm also concerned because I'm imagining they're saying that the Therabot won't judge them, which is fine.
Yep.
But at the same time, I mean, so much of what I do in therapy is confront my patients on, let's say, their self-destructive behavior or confront them on their pathology and their pathological ways of relating. And a Therabot is not going to confront, I can't imagine a Therabot confronting somebody on their dysfunctional way of relating to them because they're a robot.
Can you imagine if somebody comes to you and is like, and you're confronting them about a problem, and then they're like, well, Therabot doesn't think it's a problem.
It's like all my friends hate me, but my Therabot says it's not my fault, that it's everybody else's. But can't you see that?
I could definitely see that happening. Yes, I really could. And this is where I think sometimes, like, it says that, again, I don't know how this was working, but the psychologist and the psychiatrist was consulting with the Therabot. My other thing that I really struggled with is the bias. The possible bias of the psychologist, the possible bias of the psychiatrist with it, like creating these rules, right? I don't come to anything thinking that we're all like this blank slate and we are all going to be non-judgmental. We all have our own worldviews, our own ideas of thinking about things. But I could just imagine that, you know, if a psychologist and a psychiatrist are the ones creating this, their biases are going to be, even if they don't mean to, it's still going to be in there.
Well, it reminds me of just complete affirmative therapy, that you just affirm and you validate everything that is going on for an individual, which in some ways has landed us in this hugely hedonistic culture. And everything goes.
Yes. And I just think that was very interesting. I also think it's very interesting at the end of the article, they say that 90% of responses were consistent with therapeutic best practices. So then I'm like, what was it 10% that wasn't?
Right.
That kind of concerns me too, is like, okay, because I mean, I've used like Grok and ChatGPT and stuff like that, and there's times that I put something in there and I'm using a word in a certain way and it is interpreting that word incorrectly. And so it will respond to me and I'm like, wait, that's not what I meant. And I will have to use either a different word or use it in a different context or give it an example. And then it will produce like what I'm looking for. So I think that's very interesting too, that I mean, even though this is technically the gold standard, it was still 10% off.
Right.
So I think we have to be really hesitant. I don't think that I don't think AI is going away.
Right.
I think AI is here to stay, and I think AI is definitely going to be utilized in therapy. But how is it utilized?
I think that is really, I think, the question. And I think, you know, if you're going to use it as an adjunct, I think that should be okay, generally, especially if you're talking about treatments such as behavior therapy, cognitive behavior therapy, dialectical behavior therapy, things like that make a lot of sense. And another thing that they mentioned in the original article, and again, you and I weren't quite sure that this was very accurate, where it said for every available provider in the United States, there's an average of 1,600 patients with depression or anxiety alone.
And again, I'm wondering, is that clinical level? Is that non-clinical level?
Well, and because we don't have the article, we don't have the citation, so we don't really know. But what about the thought of helping people? And I think that is really what they did here, is because it was a clinical trial, it's like it was given to some people and not to others.
Yes.
And that it might be advantageous for people maybe who are on a wait list, for people that can't get in to see a clinician right away. And I think as long as it's kind of contained to almost like practicum level clinicians that just kind of know how to kind of nod and validate and reflect and do some of those things.
Right.
And they're not really getting deep in the weeds with patients, because I think that's when things can really get into trouble.
Yeah. Now, one thing I do want to point out here is that if anybody said anything about self-harm or suicidality or suicidal ideation or anything like that, here's my one concern. It said that the Therabot actually told them to call 911, which a clinician wouldn't do that. A clinician would then do a full suicide assessment, put in a safety plan, all of these things. But I do find that now I'm glad that it told them to do something, but I do find that as a limitation and a little bit of a concerning limitation.
Absolutely, because I know when I have patients that are telling me that they're suicidal, I really sit with them and I talk with them of what's going on. Let's talk about the suicide plan. What are you going to do? And one of the big things that I use with my patients is the relationship.
Yeah.
That I tell them, look, I can't do this work without you. You need to be alive to be there with me. I'm fighting for you, but you got to fight for you as well. A chatbot's not going to do that. Even I think sometimes if they're calling 911 or a suicide hotline, that's very temporary. And there is no relationship. And that was a huge concern for me. It's almost like I will talk to you and I will affirm you. But if you get into, some deep issues, I'm going to abandon you in a sense. I'm not going to be there for you. You've got to call someone else.
Yeah, and I thought that was a little bit interesting. I'm sure that they're trying to figure out a way around that, which, again, I would appreciate, because even if somebody is using this in between sessions, like I would want them to have something a little bit more concrete than that.
I agree.
But I do think that there is a place for AI with a lot of guardrails.
Right. Well, and the other thing that we didn't even talk about yet is we don't know if these results are sustainable.
Right. Yes.
That they're showing, oh, great, there's a decrease in symptoms in just a matter of weeks, maybe a couple months, but there is no long-term follow-up. And so it may work immediately in the moment, but what happens when you take the bot away? Also, I know from my patients that if they were to have something that they could always turn to in a crisis, they would never internalize those skills themselves because they would always have someone remind them, and that it can almost create a sense of like, I don't know if you'd call it laziness, but just
like a crutch.
A crutch that they don't want to have to, completely internalize a lot of the work that they have to do themselves, because TheraBot's there and TheraBot will remind them what to do at all times.
Yeah, and that I do find as an issue, because I do think that one of our goals, and remember that's how I started this, what is the goal of therapy? The goal of therapy is for that person to be a well-adjusted,
self-sustaining,
individual.
Yes, self-regulating.
In life.
Yes.
And if something is always there, then I do find that crutch is the best word for that. And then are we implementing a level of learned helplessness? I can't do this without TheraBot.
Right.
And then
I don't know if that's the case for everybody, but I think it's an excellent point, because I do think for some,
money.
Yes.
Then it goes back to, are you providing this so that somebody is always needing that?
Right.
And so therefore they will be a lifelong user of TheraBot or whatever it is.
Whereas, again, I think, what is the goal of therapy? I think if you ask 100 different therapists, you're going to get 100 different answers.
Absolutely.
But I honestly believe my goal for my patients is for them to not need me anymore.
Absolutely.
So that I no longer have a job. It's really ideally the way I see it. And you're right, are a lot of other clinicians thinking that way, and is AI thinking that way?
Yeah. And I don't know. Again, that goes back to the bias of whoever is creating these.
Exactly.
Is that their end goal in mind? Is that you're not going to need this TheraBot, or you're not going to need that? And then is TheraBot even going to realize, you're using me a lot and you're not getting any better. You've used me 100 times in 5 weeks ago, and you're using me 100 times this week.
And that's where a therapist would say, what's going on here? I don't see that there's progress.
Right.
I think that's an excellent point, is will the TheraBot confront potential lack of progress?
And well, from what we can tell, it is non-judgmental. So therefore,
probably not.
I don't know. I would like to see how would a TheraBot or an AI or something like that actually confront somebody. I think that would be a level of intelligence that maybe AI hasn't gotten to yet.
And if it gets to that level, that's almost even more concerning.
Yeah, I'm not sure if that's going to be positive.
Right. I start thinking Terminator, and it starts to kind of have a mind of its own. But but we must look at AI with caution.
Yes, but also with some positivity. There is some good stuff happening here, and we're happy about that. I mean, if it is continuously helping somebody.
And sustainable across time.
Exactly. So these studies are good. They're helpful to us. Also, it's great for us to see the limitations and some cautions. So we hope that you've enjoyed this. Please give us a like if you enjoyed this video. Please let us know what you think about AI and chatbots and TheraBot and all these possibilities. And of course, let us know if you have any topics that you would like us to do. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel so that you can always see us for Counsel Trends. And don't forget, we love being a part of your life.